Friends, colleagues, good morning. As I reflect on your topic, it strikes me that this is the era of disruption, so much so that that word no longer means what it once did. In 2018, as a new government of Barbados, one of the first things we did was to design and establish a US $40 million project to digitalize and modernize the environment in which people and the government interact. Note I say the environment, because it is not enough to simply transform the way government does business, but beyond how government relates to itself, we have to modernize the environment in which all sectors of the economy interact. Public sector, private sector, including startups and sole proprietorships, the household economy, the third sector and academia, and individuals. So we started that work in 2019, and what is that project about? Everything from digitizing records so we can make full use of big data, or Barbados Statistical Service is transitioning to a statistics and data analytics authority, to migrating key government services online. The issuance of a police certificate of character has moved from weeks to 24 hours through an online application process. Immigration services, the renewal of driver's licenses, the payment of land tax, and the issuance of liquor licenses, which are so key in a hospitality-based economy. These have all been digitalized, and other key services are coming on board. That work also includes a public investment dashboard, so that first government and then the public can track delivery on major projects that are critical for development. And it also includes training for key public officers in the application of disruptive technologies. And then 2020 came and showed us that, as the young people on my team say, we thought we were doing something, but perhaps not fast enough for a global shutdown forced by a pandemic. Immediately, a delivery economy was created where goods and services had to reach people where they were, and payments needed to be made and received in remote locations. In Barbados, this coincided with the establishment of a national payment system. We passed this legislation last year, and what success would look like under this legislation and the ecosystem that it creates is a reduction in the cost of payments for Barbadians by loosening the hold banks alone had on the payment system. This act allows new players to introduce new technologies that would lower costs and make all kinds of payments, including those for government licenses, but also those among individuals and companies, easier and faster. But the work we are doing is not just about domestic markets. Otherwise, what is the point of digital if it does not serve to remove several of the barriers to regional and international trade that exist in physical brick-and-mortar environments? Your topic is interestingly framed because the digital disruption movement must, by definition, be global. We are doing nothing for the citizens and residents of Barbados, of the Bahamas, of the Cayman Islands, if our digital agenda does not allow their creative and productive capacity to meet a global market. This is what we discovered when we started investigating the international payments environment, that there were barriers to a Barbadian company or artist selling in the Amazon marketplace or on Etsy or any of the countless other platforms. So we began the work not just to access those spaces, but to start creating indigenous regional spaces. And on that, we are working with local idea labs, Barbadian developers who snatch a problem from our shared environment and create and build a solution. This is one of those places where it is not for government to solve the problem, but simply to open up to the solution. But what 2020 also showed us was what kinds of companies could quickly move to a digital environment and which could not, and why. The answer was reasonably predictable. Larger companies with capital and brand recognition could easily buy a fleet of food delivery vehicles and pay for the tech support to throw up an online platform overnight. Small retail, less so, and sole proprietor businesses selling unique products or services, even less so. When we introduced our COVID economic recovery measures for small businesses, getting cash into the hands of small business owners, we saw that a percentage of those resources were invested in the most basic of technologies. People bought smartphones with decent cameras, they got bank or other financial institution or payment system accounts, they got an Instagram account, and just like that, they were in online retail or services. We watched that process to develop a blueprint for what businesses need, at least to survive, and work from there to figure out what they need to thrive and how to make sure that they get those things more quickly. So here's an example. Delivery companies need precise location information, and we now have in Barbados a building ID system. The magic point happens when we are able as government to grant programmatic access to that data set to companies who can use it to become more efficient in what they do. As governments, we want that. We want these small delivery and other startups to become more profitable, to grow, to hire more Barbadians as drivers and dispatchers, but also as managers and developers. So a true high-value, high-wage, tech-based economy can take hold. Another digital disruption opportunity that we saw during COVID had to do with our major productive sector, tourism. We developed the Barbados Employment and Sustainable Transformation Plan to respond to a sector that employs directly and indirectly 40% of the labor force and contributes almost as much to GDP. Economic activity in that sector fell overnight to zero. Barbados saw an over 18% decline in our economy in 2020, driven largely by a standstill in international travel and tourism. If we had not introduced the Welcome Stamp program and this BEST initiative, it would have been worse. In fact, after Barbados finalized our domestic and external debt restructuring, debt, including arrears, went from 176% to 117% of GDP. The figure at the end of March 2021 was 153%, but why? Only 5% of that accounts for actual borrowing, and nearly 31% is because of the shrinkage in the economy. In other words, since your GDP, your denominator is much smaller, your debt as a percentage of GDP appears much higher. So given this impact, the BEST program invests primarily through preference shares in the re-engagement of workers in the tourism sector. But it also requires that companies subscribing to the program agree to a few things. One of those is training for workers. This past May Day, we just launched a partnership with Coursera that will make available to Barbadians free of cost thousands of courses in the areas they feel will enhance their productivity and competitiveness. And the second thing is a greening and digitization investment plan, which forms a part of BEST, where companies digitalize services and processes to lower costs and improve services and sustainability. Moments like this, where an entire sector must come to terms with its survival, are the moments to challenge the model and drive the kind of disruptive transformation that will mean its sustainability. And we're seizing that opportunity in Barbados in the tourism sector. But of course, using digital capabilities to change expectations, to change behavior, to change performance, to increase well-being is not just about companies. It is fundamentally about people. Barbados' new digital ID is perhaps one of the most transformational of all. It re-registers the population with a single digital identity that removes much of the time and nuisance in presenting several times to several government and business environments in order to get things done. But it also has tremendous potential applications, for example, in simplifying state-regulated transactions between individuals, such as child maintenance between non-custodial and custodial parents. COVID-19 has shown us that the most important economic input is care. Children have been at home. Carers have been challenged to show up at work. Countries like Barbados have, as a COVID-19 economic measure, invested more in care workers, in households and communities. The intersection between this care economy, the fact that much of it is unpaid work done by women, the fact that in economies like Barbados, more women than men were separated from their work, and the question of how to better support women's productive capacities has at least part of its answer in the digital economy. I hope that some of your discussions today make these topics visible. So now, what are the threats? In this region, we have been talking, are still talking, about the notion of vulnerability as a part of the framework for determining not just access to concessional finance, but the lines along which the rules of international finance and norms of public finance are drawn. Much of this has to do with the climate crisis, which impacts us disproportionately, but to which we do not contribute. But this is not the only part of it. 15 years ago, I was in Santiago, Chile, with a team from ECLAC discussing this question of a multidimensional measure for vulnerability. And one of the things we put on the table then was a country's capacity to, one, develop, and two, adapt to new technologies. I feel now that we were quite clever back then, because of course this is what concerns us now. What in our formal and non-formal education and enabling environment is preparing us to be high knowledge economies that produce, not just consume, high-value tech products? Where are we as countries and as a region in our cybersecurity agenda? And do we stand to be left behind in the one area of economic activity that has the capacity, if we dare, to equalize the world? You want to talk vulnerability? Climate crisis, yes. Debt crisis, yes. But if we miss the digital revolution, we miss the kind of opportunity for job-led growth to which we will not catch up. Friends, I leave you with these small questions on which to reflect, and I wish you a wonderful conference.